Greetings, friends, and welcome to episode 19 of the Rob Breakenridge Show. Thanks so much for being with us. Thank you for downloading and listening to this podcast. We got a great show for you today. Coming up later this week marks the one-year anniversary of that monster wildfire that ravaged the town of Jasper. We'll hear from a top town official in Jasper about the status of the recovery, the work that still lies ahead, and what lessons have been identified in the town's independent assessment of the fire. Also, coming off the heels of the First Minister's gathering this week in Ontario and looking ahead to an ever-approaching deadline for a U.S.-Canada trade agreement, there's a timely and important new white paper out from the expert group on Canada-U.S. relations. They're calling on the federal government to prioritize building Canada's energy future. Specifically, that would mean a shorter timeline on declaring projects to be in the national interest and also making sure that Indigenous engagement is at the center of this approach. We're going to hear today from Tim Sargent. He's a member of the expert group and is director of domestic policy, and he's a senior fellow at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. Now, he's also got a unique perspective on all of this trade drama with the U.S., as he had previously served as Deputy Minister of Trade during the NAFTA renegotiation during the first Trump administration. But first, a fascinating shakeup in Alberta politics with some added twists and turns just in the last few days. Earlier this summer, MLAs Peter Guthrie and Scott Sinclair announced that they were going to seek to revive the PC Party of Alberta. Now, both had been members of the UCP caucus. Guthrie, in fact, was a cabinet minister too, but for various reasons, the two found themselves on the outs and sitting as independents. Guthrie had very publicly and vocally voiced concerns over the controversy around healthcare contracts and procurements and had clashed with the government over the need for a public inquiry. For his part, Sinclair voted against the government's budget over his concerns that it neglected rural communities in favor of the big cities. But both men, though, believe that the UCP has lost its way on many issues and has become too cozy with those pushing for a referendum on separation. So they see a revived PC party as a vehicle for a fiscally conservative, socially moderate, and pro-Canada perspective. And they believe that there are many Albertans open to such an option. Of course, there are fears that this could once again split the Conservative vote and benefit the NDP as we saw in 2015. Perhaps, though, it could cut the other way by splitting the vote among those who want the UCP out of office. But there is a dispute still over the name itself, and this stems from some lingering issues resulting from the previous merger of the PC and Wildrose parties. And now some legal threats from the UCP have pushed things in a slightly different direction. Earlier this month, we had recorded an interview with Peter Guthrie and Scott Sinclair, and we're set to release that interview this week. And we'll get to that conversation shortly, but as mentioned, things have changed a bit since then. So for an update on matters, I caught up with Peter Guthrie on Thursday afternoon. Here's that conversation. Peter, good to have you back with us here.
Yeah, thanks, Rob.
Now, we recently recorded an interview with you and Scott Sinclair, and we'll have that for our audience. But as mentioned, a few developments since we recorded that interview, just in terms of how this might all unfold, and now involving perhaps the Alberta Party. So what can you tell us about what's changed here?
Right. So we announced on July 2nd. We had a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of support. Hundreds of emails and volunteers coming in. We started with a very small team. We got out of the gates. We got our champions for us in various parts of the province, and we started that signature process. Then I believe it was on the 17th of this month, perhaps the 14th of this month, 10 days ago, we received a cease and desist from the United Conservative Party. There was the claims that they made were very large and broad in nature, and we did not feel that we were infringing. But regardless, they made it clear that they were going to pursue legal action against us on a number of different fronts. While this was going on, just by happenstance, the Alberta Party had reached out on a couple of occasions just to have some casual conversations about a new direction that they would like to go. They felt that there could be some good synergies for the two of us, our new startup and their party that had been around for 15 years and was kind of looking for a new direction. And so those those talks have now turned into, I think, a full-fledged collaboration. And we're looking to, Scott and I, join the Alberta Party at some point in the future, very soon, I would expect, and do a name change after, of course, the members of the Alberta Party agree to doing so.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because, as I understand it, then the rules around the use of this name, the PC Party, it's a little bit different for a new party versus an existing party. Is that your understanding?
Yeah, I mean, from what we've been led to believe, the Elections Alberta, they're the ones they're the authority on elections law. Now, the UCP, they can make all sort of claims all the claims that they want. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're right or that they're accurate. The name, the PCAA, Progressive Conservative Association of Alberta, is a name that was put up after the last election. So in May of 2023, there was an individual in Calgary that registered that name and has that reserve. So we're still seeking to use that name. There is no trademark on PCAA or Progressive Conservative Association of Alberta, and it's an available name through Elections Alberta. So we intend to work with them, and if there's any tweaks that are necessary, as was the case with the Wild Rose as an example, of course we're amenable to that. But so for now, we think that this joining forces with the Alberta Party and then doing the name change, it gets us to our end faster, right? It gets us official party status, and we could be a going concern in September versus if we gathered all the signatures and then waited for Elections Alberta up to 60 days to give their approval. It is possible that it could be Christmas by the time we receive that. So this puts us months ahead of our stated goal, and it gets us out from having to get into a legal battle with the UCP.
What's the state or the official status, I guess, of the Alberta Party? As you say, they're still a registered political party in Alberta. They previously had a presence in the Alberta legislature. Like, for example, I mean, do they have a leader right now?
They do have a leader, and she's an interim leader. Lindsay she's been with the party for quite some time. She's a lawyer, quite an astute political mind, and she saw this opportunity and reached out to us and thought that this would be a good fit for everybody. It might be that we're all within just a few degrees of each other as far as the political spectrum is concerned, but we recognize that both the UCP and the NDP, they've been focused on a very small segment of the population, and there's a large swath of people that are politically homeless, and they just thought, well, why are we going to and why should we compete in the same space when we want to get to the same end?
So when we see the legislature resume in the fall, then for the time being, I guess you and Scott would sit as representatives then of the Alberta Party?
I suspect quite easily by then we will be through this process. The first thing that will have to happen is an SGM will be called, and then the members of the Alberta Party, they will vote as to whether or not they will accept a name change. Once we get that, then we will pursue that with Elections Alberta. It could still be up to 60 days working with Elections Alberta, but they don't have to go through a signature verification process. So I would expect a lot shorter timeline than 60 days. I think, I'm guessing, and I can't suppose, but I would think, 30 days would maybe be a little bit more in line. So let's say we give a month for each of those two processes to work through. I think October 1st would be a very fair expectation for us to reach our goals.
Okay, very interesting. So from there, then I guess would we see a leadership race or a policy convention, or what would be the next steps from there?
Yes, exactly. There's I think the original plan was to have a policy convention in November-ish. the date hadn't been established yet. We'll certainly be working with the Alberta Party on that. We think it's a great idea. As we're coming together, we're going to need to put together a platform and policies for the upcoming election, which will at that point be 2 years away, as long as there is not a snap election called. So we will, of course, we've been encouraging groups that have been reaching out to us to right now put some of that platform together for us, so that we're ready here come fall to be able to bring that in. So we've been working with different groups in healthcare, education, and energy and environment for people to help us out with that and get us a little bit of a head start.
Okay, so that conversation from Thursday afternoon, Peter Guthrie, he's the MLA for Airdrie-Cochrane, just how they're pivoting in this strategy with the end goal still being the same, to bring back the PC Party, but now going through the Alberta Party and maybe prompting that party to rebrand itself as the PC Party as opposed to creating a new party from scratch. So that has emerged this week, and a little bit of an explanation there from Peter Guthrie as to why they had to change course. So let's go back to the conversation that we recorded with both gentlemen earlier this month. Peter Guthrie, who you just heard, the MLA for Airdrie-Cochrane, and also Scott Sinclair is the MLA for Lesser Slave Lake. And a bit more background on their paths to this point. Getting involved in politics, getting involved with the UCP, what they witnessed over the last few years, and what was kind of the breaking point for both of them and prompting them to eventually become independents, and now this endeavor to bring back the PC Party of Alberta. So here's that conversation with Peter Guthrie and Scott Sinclair. But let's talk a bit about how we got to this point for both of you. Just sort of, what happened in your individual circumstances and kind of the changes you've observed in recent months or even over the last couple of years. Peter, why don't I let you go first?
Yeah, sure. I guess, kind of going back probably a year and a half, maybe now, as infrastructure minister, I started to see some, I would just say some areas of concern. And so I was doing my best with the team in the Department of Infrastructure to try to improve procurement practices. Along the way, more and more instances or something, some of those contracts, some of those procedures, processes that we were seeing and within not only infrastructure, but within health, recovery, addictions, we were seeing some errors there, and we were trying to shine a light on that within the department within the Premier's office, actually. And more and more started to come out over the health scandal, or it's now turned into the health scandal. And I started to pull on some threads and learn a little bit more and more, starting with the Tylenol deal and working through to chartered surgical facility contracts in recovery. And it just started to branch and web out. It came to a head, and I, with the information that I had, I confronted Cabinet on it, not on one occasion, but on two occasions. And the word that I used to describe the situation that occurred in the second Cabinet meeting was this profound disappointment that I had, not necessarily that that they didn't believe me, but that they wouldn't act upon it. And I felt right after the cabinet meeting, the second cabinet meeting, that I was finished as a cabinet minister, and I decided that a couple of days later, let the emotions kind of settle down. I decided a couple of days later that I would step down. And then, over the course of 50 days under suspension and caucus, there was a decision made to release me. And here we are. I'm an independent MLA, and I can tell you, and I know Scott's brought this up numerous times, is how much of a relief actually it has been to be able to speak out now and to take a different course.
Yeah. Well, Scott, let's talk about your situation. I know these timelines kind of overlap, don't they?
Yeah, they do. It was, a bit of a happy accident. Both Pete and I, you're in caucus, so you see each other. But we're definitely both Oiler fans, and we chatted a few times and hung out a few times. But not real close, but we were kind of brought together by both unceremoniously being kicked out of the party, and both for similar but different reasons. Mine was a little bit more about maybe sticking up for the riding in Northern Alberta and some of the inequities I thought that were obvious, and highlighting those inside of not just this budget, but just a long time coming with people up there. But more importantly, I think it was about the fiscal discipline, reckless spending, and I was a private member, so the first I learned of us intentionally running multiple year deficits was basically the day of the budget, which is when private members find out about the details in there, and I was profoundly disappointed. I mean, a lot of the things that we're asking questions about right now, when we were still in the party, that the leadership didn't want to answer, are foundational things that conservatives win elections on. And it was, like Pete said, very disappointing to be removed. And then we just did our best to, first I was all by myself in the legislature, trying to figure out how to write your own speeches. You don't have staff right out of the gate. And then, you're even defending your own point of order, which is a term most people wouldn't know unless you watched our Assembly TV, but it's basically like litigating a case in a courtroom. So all these exciting things happen, but a big moment for me was, the UCP with this premier has really morphed into, a really extreme policies, and, not the party that was elected in 2023. And, they're going to be known as a separatist party. The premier's trying to, whisper it in some rooms and then walk it back in another, and say that, she supports treaty rights to First Nations. Then she goes and whispers to her base that, I'm going to get it done for you. Don't worry about it. And I think Albertans are smart enough to be able to read through that. And it's going to be very difficult to unring the bell of separation. And Bill 54 was a big moment for me personally. Up until then, I sincerely wanted to find a path forward back to the party. But between that and then some of the other policies and just the overall tone of the party, it seemed like it's become a very hostile group where, I said this once before, but if you talk to some of the people who are pro-separation, which I'm not, but I respect people's views, and I, of all people in Northern Alberta, understand the sentiment of being ignored and under-resourced. But if you don't agree with separation, then you're not a conservative. And that's sort of the sentiment of a lot of the real hardcore supporters right now. And we just feel that both Pete and I, we didn't really have a name, but a lot of people were encouraging us, to do something different. And it just became evident once we found out the name was a possibility that it really would be providing a voice for a lot of the unspoken majority of Albertans that are looking for something. Pete mentions it all the time: fiscal transparency, accountability, stable, steady hand. But also, I think just the tone of politics. I think people are really uncomfortable with kind of both sides in this province, in particularly, where they feel like they both kind of pander to 10 to 20%, and there isn't room for what I would call the silent majority in Alberta.
Yeah. Well, Peter, let me bring you in because, I mean, you've been around a bit longer. You were elected in 2019. You served under Jason Kenney as leader. And in fact, you were an early supporter of Danielle Smith. So I think maybe you saw that there was some potential or some hope there. But what have you observed over the last year or even in recent months where you've seen a change?
Yeah, I was one of the first to support Danielle Smith. I certainly didn't have a long-term relationship. So I didn't really fundamentally know the core of the individual. And I think I speak for many Albertans when I say that, she's not the person that I thought coming in. I mean, as an MLA coming into this business at 50 years old, my intention was to, run for 2 terms. And then at 58, be done. And hopefully we had a leader and a government that was moving in the right direction. Unfortunately, what we've seen is fiscal irresponsibility. I'm sure, as you know, we have a deficit upcoming in this upcoming year. $5.4 billion is being projected. I suspect it'll be more in the 8 to 12 bracket. Unfortunately, though, expenses are on the rise. In 3 budgets, Danielle Smith has increased expenses 23%. If you look back to 2019, it's a 42% increase, which is far greater than growth plus inflation. From a bureaucratic perspective, from 2019 to 2022, I was part of a government that reduced the size of government by 7.5%. Since then, that is reversed by increasing 14% under Smith. Now, both Scott and I, we believe in working within Canada for the betterment of Alberta. So there's another fundamental change or difference, I think, that Scott and I would have had and we would have been dealing with if we were inside caucus anyway. And then let's put on top of it the scandals around health and procurement. So, these are sort of the areas that Scott and I want to focus on: that fiscal discipline, limited government, working within Canada for the betterment of Alberta, and bringing back transparency, accountability, credibility to the government. I think probably one of the ways that we could do that is implementing consequences, for those that do not follow the rules. That the rules are there, and they're being manipulated and changed, but really there's no consequences for not following those, especially for politicians. So we would like to, instill some of that credibility again.
Yeah. And just Peter, just further to the scandal, because I think it's kind of gone quiet for now, maybe as we await some further revelations, or maybe what the Auditor General uncovers. I know the Auditor General recently asked for some more time and resources. So that was interesting. It's not going to be a public inquiry, I don't think, if the government can help it. Where are we at on this?
Well, the RCMP, they too have an investigation, as does the Auditor General. I can only surmise that there's some sharing of information there that's going on. To my knowledge, potentially tens of thousands of pages of documents have been submitted. That's a lot of evidence to go through, interviews that are being conducted. And the story is not done. More and more information slowly is trickling out. I think part of the issue is that it is a very big web, and it's a complex issue. One of the things that Scott brought up in the House was this deal with spending $250,000 on carpeting, installing a new commercial kitchen at Edmonton House, and these new china, I think, was another one. Those are simple items that people understand. When you get to this health mess, it's a very intricate. It involves a lot of different departments, a lot of different people, and contract negotiations, as well as some sole source contracts that took place. So it's not an easy thing to be able to disseminate to people. So I think it's taking a while, but I do feel that eventually it's going to come to task against this UCP government. And not to mention Athana Mentalopoulos, the former CEO of AHS, she has a case before the courts.
Right.
And she has put in, I believe it's 3 different submissions. There's a lot, I've read them all, and there's a lot of evidence in there that I think is the public should be aware of, and probably will be aware of at some point.
Mm-hmm. Scott, let me go back to the separation issue, which you mentioned. I mean, I remember the 2023 election. There was no talk of this. And surely, I'm sure you wouldn't have run for the UCP if this was so front and center. So what's changed? I mean, was it the federal election this year, or do you think the leader has seen some kind of political advantage in making this an issue? Where did this come from, do you think?
Well, I think there's probably a couple different points that are worth mentioning, Rob. The first one would be there's definitely a lot of anti-Ottawa sentiment here in the province after the federal elections win, especially the way it happened. I think a lot of people, in December, the polls looked really encouraging for Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives. So I think the high watermark for that kind of anti-Ottawa or separation sentiment was right after the election. And I think a lot of it was probably emotional. And I don't think, the polling, we haven't seen any recent polling, but the mainstream poll that I seen was like 36%. But within those details, I think only 19 to 20 was like a hard committed group that wanted to separate. And I would say there's another 10 to 15 in there that are probably maybe more, like I said, emotional about the election. And I think that's subsided now, but the premier's been able to capture it as a massive distraction. So all of the things that we see, we have an $80 billion budget in this province, and I'm always trying to talk to Northern Albertans about it when they talk about Ottawa, is what are we doing with the $80 billion we get right now? People complain all the time if they work at a mill or on the rig or at a hospital and they're working overtime that all their overtime money goes to Trudeau or to Ottawa. But a lot of it actually goes to the province as well. And, I'm always asking, what are we doing with the $80 billion? Are we getting value for money on the services that you could see? And forget a moment about the things that are emotional that maybe make us upset sometimes, and just look at our roads, our critical infrastructure, our highways and bridges. Look at our healthcare system. We can't get doctors. We can't deliver babies in my riding. We look around and these roads are decaying. So, I'm not dead set against ever running a deficit under the circumstances. But one of the things I mentioned in my original post was, let's do that one time and bite the bullet and spend some money on things that are only going to get more expensive in the future, and people can see it every day. So the healthcare, housing, public safety, we can tackle a lot of those in this province. And right now, I would say the UCP are failing on that, but they've been able to use a sort of sleight of hand trick on the separation issue. But to Pete's point, I think over the course of time, because I don't know if your next question will be on vote splitting, but a lot of people are asking about that right now and referencing 2015. But I would say that by the time these investigations come out and then the referendum falls flat, those are going to be some extremely important issues at the ballots. And we're not trying to split the vote. We're going to win the election. And we're going to do that by providing people with a salvaged conservative government with strong moral compass, steady values, and honestly, just flat out normalcy, like making government normal again, not so toxic and divided and hostile all the time.
Yeah, I think, Peter, I think it's convenient for the Premier to deflect, to focus on Ottawa instead of her own government. But Alberta does have some legitimate concerns and complaints. So to what extent do you think the Premier is being a little bit reckless here? And what does a smarter strategy look like in dealing with Ottawa?
Yeah, you're right. It can't be Ottawa's fault all the time. There's no question about it. And that is sort of the go-to. But there's no doubt about it that we are not getting a fair deal. And I certainly appreciate the Premier's position on that as far as defending Alberta. That said, I feel that any leader of this province should be taking that position. You should be taking a strong position in favor of our province. Now, the issue at hand, though, is when you come forward with ultimatums. The Premier has put forward 9 of them, and she did so basically on the first day that the Prime Minister was elected. Now, within a week, she had come out with an address saying that we were going to hold a referendum on separation in 2026. Well, what happens if you go to that referendum and 75% of the people in the province decide that they're not going to go down that route? Right. Right. Well, now you're going back to Carney, hat in hand, with a 25% mandate trying to negotiate a deal. She would have been a lot better off not putting forward those kind of consequences and trying to negotiate firmly in favor of Alberta, but trying to build those allies and alliances with other provinces and coming to Ottawa with strength and making sure that Carney holds to the election promises that he made. So I think that we're going to end up in a much weaker position after a vote on separation.
Peter, and I'll ask you too, Scott, but Peter, do you think this referendum, I mean, is the horse out of the barn? Is this now inevitable? And do you also think maybe that there's the possibility that not just a referendum, maybe an early election next year?
I mean, it's a possibility. There's been talk of having a snap election this fall, even. I think there's a lot of risks with that. Naturally, you have the teachers who may go on strike. You have the public service. You have a municipal election. There's a redraw that's going on also, and there's going to be 2 more seats come up. I think the province is going to want to be able to, maybe gerrymander is not the right word, but be able to finish and complete that redraw from which we will not get our first report on that until this fall, but the final report until the 31st of March next year. While it's not until that point that new constituency associations can be formed. And then you have to put in and instill and have AGMs at each of those new constituencies. So there's a lot of work ahead of us, not to mention the Auditor General. He has been told that at the end of March, his contract is going to end. So at some point between now and then, his report and inquiry is going to complete, and that information is going to become public. Thanamanthalopoulos' case will probably be heard along that way, and who knows what happens with the RCMP. So, to me, there's a tremendous amount of risk in government holding a snap election. So I suspect that they will hold to the election laws that exist around, the fixed date elections.
Yeah. You think the referendum's a certainty?
There's been a commitment made, I think, publicly on her part. So I think it's probably, I do think so. She's traveling around with the Alberta Next panel right now and probably hearing a lot of what she wants to hear. APP, as an example, the Alberta Pension Plan is on that agenda. Even though, as we saw from the survey results, that 10% of Albertans support Alberta Pension Plan, yet it's become part and parcel with this Alberta Next panel that will be traveling around. So they seem dead set on having that referendum, and they need to do more convincing on certain elements. And so that's what it appears that they're doing throughout the course of the summer. Yeah.
So Scott, what do you think?
I'd never rule out this premier calling a snap election. I think, from a couple different perspectives. Pete did say there's a few things that need to happen, you would think. I think that given just the amount of excitement and news that we've generated in the last week, that it wouldn't shock me that she tried to get ahead of us even. Yeah. And get a chance to throw some cold water on both our party in terms of organizing, as well as the Republican Party. So that's an important, reminder for people who are concerned about vote splitting as conservatives, that the train's already left the station. The Republican Party is eating directly into the base of the UCP. That you saw it with 17% in the by-election at Old Didsbury. And, I firmly believe that both myself and Pete, we're going to be able to galvanate a real unspoken giant in terms of interest in a centrist party that definitely still leans right, because I think that the province is still conservative, but also not being afraid to say we're a progressive conservative or a small c conservative or whatever labels there are. I get frustrated a little bit with it, because to me, left or right or Republican, Democrat, whatever you want to call these political labels, although they're realities, there's no world, like I have a family with 2 kids, where anything is black and white. Your whole world is made up of compromises on a daily basis, and we should have a government that is more aligned to that as well, one that sees things from a bunch of different perspectives, and we don't just listen to things in terms of one issue. And like I said, I think Pete and I have really galvanized the movement. It's just a matter of capturing those signatures with the boots on the ground. The good news about us right now, Rob, is we have to collect 8,900 signatures. Most people have already known if they've heard already, but we're going to have a chance to talk to people and make our case at the door and pound the pavement and make sure that we convert this initial excitement into handwritten signatures and official party status. But we're fully prepared for any option, I think, right now. Pete and I are both, and the team beneath us, a lot of amazing people. We're prepared to make a case that we can form government and provide people with a realistic, up the middle, center right government for everybody option.
Uh-huh.
So, Peter, why the PC brand then? I mean, I think maybe there's a case for a new party, but, there's some interesting baggage as well as some prominence, I guess, or name recognition with the PC Party.
Yeah, I mean, we're not trying to, bring back what there was. We're trying to, at its core, the roots of the PC Party, that were founded by Lougheed. Those are still important. Lead through integrity and accountability, and you will gain trust. And so, we understand there's a different time, and this is we're going to have to look into the future. So we'll be, building out a new platform and policy directive as we move. As far as the name is concerned, and why we selected it was more something that came to us. Scott and I, we were, well, as Scott mentioned earlier, we were a bit scrambly there. We were dismissed from the party. We didn't have staff, and we were, coordinating amongst ourselves, trying to figure out our next step. So it was quite difficult for us to take on anything new while we were in the House. But we were approached by a friend of a friend saying, "Hey, this name is available. It's been out there. It's owned by an individual in Calgary. I call her an astute Albertan that picked up the name once it became available in the spring of 2023. And, she got a message to us that she would be interested in talking to us once we finished in the House. And so, yeah, we had some more conversations. Now, since it had been 2 full years, Elections Alberta required us to have an extension on that. And so we've been given an extra 6 months to November 27th of this year to gain all those signatures and then submit to the Elections Commission for review. Hopefully we can get that in and approved before we're sitting in the House at the end of October.
Okay, so you believe that it's fair game, the name?
I do. I think, what it boils down to is the election commissioner has, he should know elections law, and he made the name available and also granted us this extension. So we're relying upon, his office in knowing what the facts are and the laws are. So, we'll just run with that until we're told otherwise. I know that the UCP is not very happy about it, but ultimately they dropped the ball. They could have re-registered the name. They didn't. The Wild Rose, they tweaked their name, Wild Rose Independence Party, but they ultimately call themselves a Wild Rose. Yep. And there hasn't been a whole lot of complaint about that. So
I think there's been a couple of parties that have used Wild Rose. Yeah. So
if I may follow up on the name
too,
ahead, Rob, the Pete and I, it's probably pretty important for listeners to understand, we didn't register the name originally. So there's this citizen that did it over 2 years ago, and that's when they released the name. And in 2019, I think the Wild Rose Loyalty Coalition or some version of that, they ran in the party, no issues there. So I think it speaks to a little bit of the competitive part of the premier being, seen us as a legitimate threat. We have 2 sitting MLAs who both have run on principled values. And I think the name itself also, even if it has a little bit of baggage, to your point, it still has automatic credibility, name brand recognition. I mean, we just had Doug Ford visit the province. The PC government in Ontario is very prevalent still. So even if people, remember near the end of times, a lot of times I think a lot of Albertans are talking about, man, like you didn't know what you had till it's gone, or what happened to that moderate conservative government, because this was supposed to be a party for everyone, a conservative party, a big tent, And I think the one success the Premier's had, and we get accused of splitting the votes the last week, but, I believe she's the one who split the Conservative movement. She's trying to divide the country with the separation. So I don't think the UCP party is a mainstream party. And, it's hard for people to try to describe the feeling sometimes, but it just doesn't feel like a comfortable fit anymore for a lot of people. So we're hopeful to provide them a nice, healthy option with a lot of excitement here.
Well, interesting times in Alberta politics for sure. Again, mypcalberta.ca. Peter Guthrie, Scott Sinclair, thank you so much for joining us here. Really appreciate the conversation.
Thanks for having us. Thanks, Rob.
Right, there you go. That was Peter Guthrie, the MLA for Airdrie-Cochrane, and Scott Sinclair, the MLA for Lesser Slave Lake. I guess you can call them independent MLAs or Alberta Party MLAs. Their goal is to be PC Party MLAs at some point, so we'll see how this all plays out over the next few months. So an interesting shakeup in Alberta politics. Much more still to get to on the program. In just a moment, we're going to talk about a very somber anniversary being marked this week in Jasper. And it was a year ago this week when things changed forever in that community. July 22nd, 2024, as this massive wildfire was converging on Jasper, the evacuation order went out, very urgent evacuation order. And in total, between residents and visitors, there were about 25,000 people who had to be hastily evacuated out of Jasper. And then just 2 days later, July 24th, 2024, as the winds really picked up, this monster, this wildfire tore through Jasper. Just unimaginable destruction, really heartbreaking and devastating destruction. So here we are 1 year later. And so those events being remembered, but it's also a look at how far Jasper has come since then. Still a lot of work to be done. So coming up in a moment here, we're going to hear from a top municipal official in Jasper. We'll find out a bit more about where things are at 1 year after the fire and some of the other issues that have come to light. I mean, the Town of Jasper commissioned its own independent review and after-action review just to go back and look at how this all unfolded. Now, there was one element of that report that implied perhaps that some of the provincial involvement might have complicated things. That didn't go over well. The Premier got angry. She demanded a retraction, an apology. The mayor of Jasper then said, look, we got nothing to apologize for. But at the same time, people are maybe misreading or overreacting to this report. It's certainly not intended to ascribe any blame to anybody. So that kind of took on a life of its own. But it is important to learn the lessons of what happened here, what could have been done differently or better. So we'll talk more about the aftermath of the Jasper wildfire. You're listening to The Rob Breakenridge Show. Well, somber anniversary being marked this week. It was 1 year ago this week that a massive forest fire raged through the town of Jasper. Of course, just before that, thousands had to be very quickly evacuated in a dangerous situation. Lots happened since then. Joining us for more on the progress since the fire, the recovery, and everything going on in Jasper. Very pleased to welcome to the program here Bill Given, Chief Administrative Officer for the Municipality of Jasper. Bill, great to have you with us here.
Thanks for having me on, Rob. I appreciate it.
I suppose in some ways maybe Jasper has kind of changed forever as a result of this fire, but just kind of an overview of the progress that's been made and what recovery has looked like.
Yeah, well, it's been a big year. We're actually officially on the anniversary of the day that the fire hit the town, was July 24th, 2024. The community sentiment right now, there's really no one way that Jasper's feeling. During that time, there were people that evacuated, people that stayed behind, people that were away, people that lost homes, whose homes were destroyed or businesses were destroyed, people whose weren't. And so the recovery process has also been unique to every individual, and has been a long road where we've worked hard to try to staff up and resource up so that we can respond to the needs of the community, while also being mindful of the fact that people are going through their own sort of personal traumas that they're dealing with. In terms of the actual progress on the ground, I think one of some of the biggest things was debris removal. At this stage now, today, 100% of properties have demolition permits in place, and 99% of impacted properties have actually been cleared. So that's a big milestone in literally clearing the ground so that reconstruction can happen. The other big thing, obviously, was providing housing for residents that were displaced. With the support of Parks Canada, we've been able to establish 370 interim housing units, which run the gamut from oil field trailers to prefabricated homes, and those units are currently housing over 520 people, which has allowed families to return to Jasper and to start to participate in community life and in the local economy. And so those are really big pieces of progress that we're very proud of. I mean, there's obviously a long road ahead still.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot was lost during the fire, obviously. So as you point out, I mean, some have been able to return, but there's still many Jasper residents who have been unable to return.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. We're mindful of the fact that there were over 820 housing units that were lost. We lost some apartment buildings. So when you heard about the numbers of structures that were lost, that kind of underplayed the number of housing units that were lost. Being our 370 interim housing units is great, is important progress and was a heavy lift, but that doesn't replace those 820 housing units. And that does mean that there are Jasperites that are continuing to live outside of town, and we're doing what we can to help them stay connected. Over this last week, we've had discussion circles, both in the community in person for residents who wanted to talk about the meaning of the anniversary for them, but we've also been hosting those online for displaced Jasperites. Displaced Jasperites can run in the upcoming municipal election for council if they wanted to. They're allowed to vote. And we've also worked to try to increase connections between Jasper, the town site, and Hinton. So we have a new transit service that's actually been launched to help residents that might have moved to Hinton on an interim basis stay connected to their community here in Jasper.
It's encouraging. In terms of the tourism industry, and I think people were mindful of what Jasper was going through initially and trying to respect that process and allowing the community to recover and rebuild. But, the tourism economy, the visitor economy is so important. So where are things at? Because it does sound like it has been a busy summer so far in Jasper. Yeah,
it has. My understanding, and certainly Tourism Jasper would be the best ones to speak to about that. Yeah. But my understanding is that the hotel properties are seeing good occupancy numbers. But we have to recognize that the total number of rooms available in Jasper is down from what it was before. Approximately 20% of the total hotel overnight accommodation capacity was lost. And that means that there are certain kinds of businesses that are seeing a reduction in numbers. So, Jasper is absolutely open. We're absolutely happy to have visitors and tourists come back. And when people are coming, the types of businesses that maybe need the most support are our downtown businesses that relied on walk-in traffic, or some of our activity-based businesses, where people, would be looking for something to do for the day. And maybe they choose to take on a rafting adventure or a guided tour. Those are the types of businesses that just there's a lower volume of people in town, and so those sort of walk-up businesses are I think still challenged. And so everybody that comes, we encourage them to check out downtown Jasper and find an adventure activity to undertake while they're here. And I guess moving forward, the question about learning from this fire, trying to better protect the community in the future, because, it's been Jasper. We've seen other communities in Alberta impacted by wildfires. I think there's more concern moving forward about, the threat that this can pose. So first of all, what can you tell us about the steps that have been taken? I know there's the buffer zone that's been created around Jasper to try to better protect the community going forward. Yeah, well, first off, Jasper's a bit of a unique jurisdiction where, the town, the municipality has jurisdiction within the town site, and things that happen outside the town site are really within the control of Parks Canada. And so we have obviously a close working relationship with them, and they've undertaken some really significant work for fuel load reduction efforts over the course of the winter. They were actually taking, mechanically felling trees, cleaning brush in a number of areas, particularly to the west of town, towards the BC border, which was an area of concern. Obviously, to the south, down the South Highway between Jasper and Banff, where the large fire was, removed a lot of the fuel load there. But Parks has undertaken a number of other measures measures outside the town site in areas that were unaffected by the fire. And within the town site, we're working to really try to encourage residents to think more about fire smarting their properties and the actions they can take on their individual, around their home to ensure that it's more fire resilient. But there's obviously a long road to go.
Now, Parks Canada is still doing its own review of the fire and the aftermath. I guess we're still awaiting that. Do we know what kind of timeline that's on?
Yeah, that's not anything I can speak to, obviously. The after action reviews, or the review of what happened, happens at many different levels. I think every organization that had any level of involvement has probably done some kind of after action review. And these run all the gamut from, at the end of the day at the back of the fire truck, the fire crew reviewing how that day went, to the broader and more systemic ones. I'm sure Parks Canada and their partner agencies will be doing and have been doing their own. I certainly can't speak to it. The municipality has recently, though, released our own after action report, and looking at sort of what was within our jurisdiction.
Let's talk about that because, much has been made of certain aspects, but just kind of an overview then of what the intent was or the purpose of Jasper launching, or I guess commissioning its own review.
Yeah, well, first and foremost, as I just mentioned, after action reviews, are a standard part of emergency response. And the goal is really to learn from every incident about how you can be better prepared or respond better in future incidents. So our after action report was commissioned by the municipality, but authored by independent emergency management consultants. And it actually draws on the firsthand experiences of over 320 participants that were either frontline fire, or that they were a part of our incident management team. And that included partners from other municipal fire services that came to support Jasper, Parks Canada, who is a part of our unified command, or Alberta Wildfire, who is also a part of that team. So it asked for their observations about where there were gaps, where things could have gone smoother, and what things might need to change going into the future. And the goal is really for us to focus on continuous improvement. Jasper's emergency response and our planning framework for emergencies was really built on the backs of hard-earned knowledge from places like Slave Lake and Wood Buffalo and High River and the Calgary floods. Like in every emergency, there's some kind of learning that gets passed on to others. And we hope our after action report passes on some learnings that can be a benefit to others. And obviously we're going to adopt them here in Jasper.
Right. And I think the mayor clarified this the other day. It was not about ascribing blame in any way then.
Yeah, no, absolutely not. Absolutely not. It's about making observations of where things can go more smoothly, and then making recommendations about what steps might need to be taken to ensure that you have better outcomes in the future. And so specifically, I mentioned before, Jasper is a unique jurisdiction. We are provincially, as a creature of the province under the Alberta Municipal Government Act, we exist within federal jurisdiction, and we have a very close partner in Parks Canada. And so when we have other responders joining us in our incident management team, that complexity isn't something that they're typically working in. And the report actually recommends making some efforts to define how things are supposed to happen here in Jasper, putting that in our plan so that other responders that join us can understand that complexity, which I think is a pretty straightforward, it starts to make common sense when you hear it like that. But making the observation about that complexity can cause problems, I think should be pretty non-controversial.
Well, and it's important because, we've seen challenges in Waterton in the past. I know there's concern about the fire risk to Banff. So, the lessons from what happened in Jasper and coordinating these various levels of government and responsibilities, it's important moving forward, isn't it?
Well, absolutely. And I would suggest that they're transferable even outside the, municipal, provincial, federal sort of context that we have here. There may be other areas where it is, urban and rural, city and county. And provincial government, or it may be a city, a county, and a First Nations community. The point is that having conversations in advance, laying down a common understanding and describing it well so people can understand it when the time comes that it needs to be put, acted on, is beneficial to everybody.
And so moving forward, you touched on it where, a lot's been done over the last year to recover from the fire, clear that debris. I guess now moving forward, the next step or the next focus is going to be on that construction side.
Yeah, absolutely. We're closely aligned with Parks Canada. They currently have land use and development jurisdiction. So, when you're going to get a building permit, it's through Parks Canada for right now. The municipality does have our own team that we've been standing up and sort of cooperating with Parks to identify ways that we can improve the system and simplify the planning regime here. That said, they've already issued 204 development permits for a range of recovery projects, from homes and multi-unit buildings like apartment buildings to hotels and commercial properties. But specifically on the residential side, we are seeing a smaller number of residential building permits being issued, and that's because I think that people are just still having those conversations with their insurers. They're making their decisions about what they want to build, and I think we have to appreciate the fact that building your own home is not something a lot of Albertans do. Often, you're buying something that is off a list of options that are available to you from a builder, and they say, "Do you want A, B, C, or D, and what color would you like it?" Here in Jasper, things were quite bespoke and unique to each individual site, and so homeowners are having to work through their insurance to understand what their financial capacity is, and then work with builders to get the specs and the details exactly right. And that's going to take some time. People are on very different paths.
And there's support there from the federal government, from the provincial government. So there's that partnership moving forward on this.
Yeah. So specifically, the federal government has recently provided additional funding to the Red Cross to help with some of the costs associated with additional soil contamination that we're seeing in some sites. Right. So that was a concern for some folks at that stage of their debris removal, and hopefully that helps alleviate some of the cost concern. Going forward, the government of Alberta through DRP has provided some funds to the municipality of Jasper to look at online permitting, which is something that we're working towards. So again, sort of in a variety of different areas, all of the government systems are being adapted to the changing needs of Jasper as residents look to rebuild.
All right. We'll let folks know much more at jasper-alberta.ca. Bill, all the best to you and everyone there. Thank you so much for making some time for us here today.
Absolutely. Thanks very much, Rob.
Okay, once again, that's Bill Given. He's Chief Administrative Officer for the municipality of Jasper. An overview of the anniversary being marked this week and how far Jasper has come from a year ago and this fire, but a lot of work still to come. But certainly an emotional time in Jasper and so many people affected by that fire. All right, coming up in just a moment, we're going to talk about the situation Canada finds itself in with all of this trade uncertainty around the United States and some added urgency stemming from that to really try to find ways to bolster our economy. And that's been the message that Prime Minister Mark Carney has been delivering, or at least promising, that he's going to try to get the best possible deal with the United States. But in the meantime, we're going to accelerate the construction of major projects as a way of bolstering our economy in the face of these tariff threats from the United States. So that's what spawned Bill C-5. That was a big topic of conversation at the First Ministers Gathering in Huntsville, Ontario this week. Well, as a backdrop to all of that, there's a new white paper out from the expert group on Canada-U.S. relations out of the Norman Patterson School of International Affairs at Carleton University. This latest white paper, though, is focused a little more inward and urging the government to prioritize building Canada's energy future, finding those projects that we can move quickly on, but also making sure that we've got Indigenous involvement, Indigenous buy-in. So we're going to hear in just a moment from Tim Sargent. He's a member of that expert group. He's also with the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. And in fact, he's got a unique perspective on all of this trade drama. He was the Deputy Minister of Trade back during the NAFTA renegotiations in the first Trump administration. So we'll hear from him in just a moment. You're listening to The Rob Breakenridge Show. Well, as Canada faces an August 1st deadline to reach a trade agreement with the United States, and Canada's first ministers meet this week to talk about building major projects, there's an important and timely new white paper out this week from the expert group on Canada-U.S. relations, looking specifically at major projects and the need to find some big wins under Bill C-5 to really bolster Canada's economy, build confidence in this new approach. Joining us for more is one of the members of that expert group. Tim Sargent is director of the Domestic Domestic Policy Program at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, was actually Deputy Minister at International Trade during those NAFTA renegotiations during Trump's first term. Tim Sargent, great to have you with us here.
Thanks for having me, Rob.
First of all, as we talk about the importance of bolstering Canada's economy, reducing our dependence on the United States, does that in any way imply we should be, pessimistic about where things are going on the trade negotiation front?
I think we just have to be realistic. President Trump's made it very clear that he wants Americans to buy American as much as possible. He doesn't seem to worry too much about the fact that Canada is his biggest customer. We're actually one of his major suppliers, so we actually play a really important role in the U.S. economy. Canada actually helps America build the things it wants to build, but he doesn't seem to think that that's very important right now. And as usual with President Trump, he's talking big, he's blustering, he's throwing around threats of tariffs. Nobody really knows where he is. So we as a country, we have to think about what are the different options here, what are the worst case scenarios, and what can we do?
Well, as you've seen in recent days, like with Japan, for example, sounds like with the European Union as well, he's imposing tariffs and calling that a trade agreement. So we don't know what it's going to look like for Canada, but maybe that gives us some clue, perhaps.
I mean, the big difference between the deals, if you can call it that are being cooked up with the EU and that have been announced with Japan, and let's see if Trump sticks to these deals because he's not famous for consistency, but he doesn't have a trade agreement with those two countries, whereas Trump himself signed what he would call the USMCA and what we call CUSMA with Canada and Mexico in his first term. So it's one thing to impose 15% tariff on Japan or the EU. It's different with Canada, where we have this trade agreement that says, look, we've agreed to essentially not have tariffs except for a very, very small range of goods. So, I think that should be seen as a very different conversation, a very different prospect.
Yeah, it seems like, I think maybe to a lot of Canadians, it feels like deja vu, like we're going through this all over again. But at the same time, I mean, it seems a lot different today than it was in the first Trump term and those NAFTA renegotiations.
It does feel very different this time around. I was involved in those negotiations the first time around. The cast of characters around the president is very different. Last time you had people like Robert Lighthizer, who was very much a trade hawk, but wanted to play within the rules of the established system. Now it looks like the people around Trump, perhaps the most influential right now is Peter Navarro, are people who just don't care about those rules. Not just the international WTO rules, but the rules of trade agreements that the U.S. has actually signed. And that puts us in, I think, very, very different territory.
So that is as the backdrop, I guess, to where things are at and the decisions this government needs to make. So what does that mean then in terms of the sort of urgency that the Prime Minister, that the government, even the First Ministers need to approach this whole idea of nation-building projects with?
So I think the Prime Minister and the Premiers really have to show a path forward for Canada in a world in which there's going to be a huge amount of turbulence so long as Trump is in the White House. And we just can't take for granted any of the access that we've had to the U.S. market. Look, I don't think Canada-U.S. trade is going to go away, even under President Trump, but we are really on our own now. We can't expect goodwill from the U.S. side or even economic realism, really. So we've got to think about what are the other options that we have? Where else can we sell all of the things that we produce here?
Right. With energy at the top of the list, I guess, and this white paper does focus on energy and energy projects. So what's the significance of the energy sector in this context? And I guess where does that present some unique opportunities for Canada?
So Canada's really lucky to have the energy sector that we have. Countries like Japan or the UK or Germany would kill to have the kind of energy resources and the broader natural resources that we have, critical minerals, for instance. So it really is a big plus. It's something that Canada has that a lot of other countries don't have. And yes, we're close to the United States, and so that's been the obvious place to send a lot of our energy. But of course, as your listeners, I suspect, will know, we're selling that oil and that natural gas at a very, very significant discount. We know we can get a much better price in Asia or in Europe for our LNG, for our hydrocarbons, for our oil. And so it's really time to start thinking about what are some of those other options out there. If nothing else, it gives us more leverage in our discussions with the Americans. Instead of being the only market for our oil, let's say, we can say, well, you don't want our oil. There are other people around the world who want our oil.
I mean, as we've seen in the past, and Trans Mountain's a good example of how challenging it is to do these big projects. And I think a lot of people wonder, is it realistic under Bill C-5 that we can accelerate all of this? So how does the white paper propose we address that?
That's right. I mean, it's, C5 we think is a great start. I think it shows that the Prime Minister is serious about building big, bold projects. But it's only a start. And there are a lot of potential tripwires out there, even for a government that's committed to getting projects done. We've seen in the past, Trans Mountain's one that did get built, but we saw Northern Gateway, for instance, found Indigenous opposition, environmentalist opposition, all kinds of legal challenges from the government of BC, for instance. There's a lot of people out there who, not I think a majority in the country, the majority of people want to see these pipelines built, even in provinces like Quebec and British Columbia. But there's a very vocal minority that doesn't want these things to happen. And they will use any and all tactics, both legal and not legal, to get their way. So the government needs to really have a game plan. They need to think through where this opposition is going to be. They need to think through what some of the problems are going to be. I mean, it's not just opposition. The companies have been walking away from projects just because it's so costly now to get anything approved in Canada. And they just don't want to take on that regulatory risk. So what we say in the paper is, C5's great, good on you, but let's now think about what our strategy is to move forward on all of these areas where we know that there's risk of slowing things down.
Well, the importance of starting with some success and finding those projects where maybe there's a shorter path, because some of these projects perhaps have already cleared some hurdles. I know there's a couple LNG projects in BC that this report points to. So why does that make sense as a place to start?
The key thing with C5 right now is, we think, is use it or lose it. We need to get moving, and the government more broadly needs some wins on the infrastructure front. Both to convince the Canadian population that we have a plan that doesn't rely on the US, and for when we face it against the Americans, to show that we're actually able to move forward as a country and find other ways of getting our products to other customers. LNG, I think, is a great one to get started with, because, of course, yes, there are greenhouse gas emissions associated with LNG, but if you're shipping LNG to Asia, you're generally displacing coal-fired electricity and coal-fired heating. So you're actually reducing the world's greenhouse gas emissions, which is what ultimately you're trying to do. It doesn't matter where those emissions are, whether they're in Canada or in Indonesia or somewhere like that. So I think it's one that can be quite acceptable to a whole bunch of people. A lot of the regulatory work has already been done. There's been a lot of discussion already with First Nations. One of the two projects that we talk about, the Lims LNG project, is actually partly owned by the Nisga'a First Nation in British Columbia. So these are good examples, I think, of ones that 95% of people in Canada should say, yeah, these are reasonable projects and they need to move quickly.
Well, yeah, and you mentioned, Indigenous consultation. The Prime Minister just held this conference with Indigenous leaders, and I know they've got questions or concerns about how this is all going to work, but you've identified where we see this in practice, where there is Indigenous partnership, Indigenous ownership, and maybe that's a model to build on, but why does this matter so much?
So I think we've found out that it's very, very important to have Indigenous buy-in. The courts are being very clear that they want to see extensive consultation with Indigenous people. And of course, Indigenous people have well-established constitutional rights in Canada. The Trudeau government passed the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People. They enshrined that in law, so that's raised the bar for consultation with First Nations even higher. So this is a must-do. The challenge with convening, as the Prime Minister did, I think it was last week, the AFN, is that's a group that represents more than 600 First Nations across the country, and can't really speak for them. They're not the right holder. One thing you learn pretty quickly in government is you need to speak to the individual First Nations, because they are the ones who hold the rights. And in the past, companies have done sometimes a reasonable job. Sometimes they've tried to skimp on that. But I think the key, and what we're saying, is that can't be something that you do later. That has to be something that happens now. And you've got to look to those First Nations that are most directly affected. And then I think it's very much up to the government and the companies to be able to show those First Nations that there's a way forward that will benefit those First Nations, as well as the company, as well as the shareholders, as well as the Canadian taxpayer. And, I think in many cases, the federal government can be there with loan guarantees or other ways to help that conversation along.
Mm-hmm. Right. And these are all big decisions. But at the same time, as we talked about, there is an urgency here. How quickly does the government need to move, do you think?
I think if we aren't at least coming up with a short list of some viable projects in the next 2-3 months, certainly as we get into September, I think people are going to start to say, well, why was it we needed to get this passed so quickly? Why did we need to get this done before the summer if we weren't actually using the summer to come up with those projects? And of course, that's more than just the federal government's job. I mean, there's provinces and energy companies themselves, they need to be part of that conversation as well. But yeah, I mean, it's certainly, we can't be waiting for years and not even many months, particularly if this is something we're going to use in the context of trade negotiations.
Well, some important weeks and months ahead for Canada. We'll see where it all goes from here. More from you at Macdonald-Laurier.ca. Tim Sargent, appreciate your insight on this. Thank you so much for joining us here.
Thank you so much.
All right, once again, that's Tim Sargent. He's a member of the Expert Working Group on Canada-U.S. Relations. He's also a senior fellow and director of domestic policy at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. And as we talked about in the conversation, there was the deputy minister at international trade during the NAFTA renegotiations back in Donald Trump's first term as president. So he's seen what these trade talks can be like. Although, I don't know, this time it just seems like a whole different beast with Donald Trump and these tariffs that he's imposing and threatening to impose. We'll see where that all goes from here. Listen, that's going to do it for this episode of the podcast. Our thanks as well to Bill Gibbon from the municipality of Jasper, also to MLAs Peter Guthrie and Scott Sinclair. Don't forget, you can subscribe at our Substack page, robbreakenridge.ca, which is where this podcast is hosted. You can find us, subscribe on Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, and other podcast platforms. Our YouTube channel as well, Rob Breakenridge Show. Also, watch for more from me at The Line Alberta, alberta.readtheline.ca, including the soon-to-be-launched The Line Alberta podcast, which I'll be hosting. So very much looking forward to that. Have yourselves a fantastic weekend, folks. We'll be back with a new episode of the Rob Breakenridge Show for you on Tuesday. We'll talk to you then. Take care.